Hey everybody, it's Professor Russo here. I'm sorry that I'm not going to be with you in person, but I just wanted to walk you through a little bit of this PowerPoint that's going to give you some tips for revising your essays. So you'll be able to find all of this information in the Essay 2 folder on Blackboard. You'll see that there's a folder there that says revision information. This PowerPoint will be there, as will a handout to help you. So one thing to keep in mind as you're looking at revising your assignment is the audience and purpose. So I've just copied this directly from the assignment sheet, and like we've been talking about all semester, one of the important things to look at is to make sure that you are actually addressing the question you're asked. Because some of you wrote essays that were really fascinating and really interesting, but they spent a lot of time talking about things like personal opinion. But if we look here, our purpose here is to make a claim about how this cultural artifact, play or novel, reveals some message about our very real society and people, supporting that claim with evidence from the text. So if you were somebody that got something back saying, hey, your ideas are drifting from that purpose, that's something to think about. Similarly, your audience should be thought to be a series of peer readers, someone at your educational level or above, college students and teachers, who have also read the text. Now, also pointing out with that, remember that that audience might have a slightly different viewpoint than you. Some of you are using a lot of I feel type of phrasing, I think, which again would be great if the purpose of the essay was to make, say, an opinion claim or to do a review. That's not what you're doing here. You're making an analytical argument, which means you're trying to convince your audience that this viewpoint is valid. That's why you might want to be kind of cautious on those types of I statements. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Another thing was most people had a strong thesis, but if you did get something that was suggesting you need to go back and revise your thesis, I want you to think back to what we did on the first day of analysis. You can go back to that original PowerPoint. That one is in the Readings in Class Handouts folder. And think about that idea that we are trying to connect the real world to the book world. So we had that example from the Harlem poem at the start of A Raisin in the Sun. Hughes uses a series of sensory metaphors. Those are things I can actually point to and underline on the page to illustrate how racism breeds frustration. Not how racism breeds frustration just for him, but this broader point connected to the real world. So, as an example, we have this student thesis from last summer on the Hunger Games. Collins creates Effie Trinket to illustrate how privilege allows people in the capital to be ignorant of the sufferings of their poor counterparts in the district. So it's weak because it doesn't say anything about what Collins is trying to show her audience about our very real world. It says what the capital does to the people in the districts. But the capital's not real, neither are these people. So we have to say, why did Collins make it that way? What's the bigger point? You can see that with this revision right here. I've put the book world here in red. Collins creates Effie Trinket to illustrate how privilege allows the elite in our society to remain ignorant of the sufferings of their poorer counterparts, often creating tension between these groups. You see that connection now? We've got the real world connected to the world on the page. I can go through my book and I can underline every time Effie Trinket speaks or shows up. And then I can ask myself, how does this say something or reflect something in the real world? I can say she's a metaphor, she's a symbol for the same thing that's happening in our real world. Another thing to think about is the idea that words matter. This is one thing where many of you had a strong thesis, but I pushed you and I said, is that really what you want to say? Thinking about your verb choice in the thesis. So I'm pointing out that you've got a lot of different options for your verb choices, and they all have different meanings. So if you use a word like illustrates or shows, that's pretty neutral. It means the author is just saying, it's here. Argue is more strong. This might be the author thinks they have a claim that not everyone agrees on. There's a stance there. Critique or criticize would be verbs that are negative. It's when the author is saying, hey, something's not right here. And then words like illuminate or reveal was from the authors essentially drawing attention to something they think we regularly overlook. So, if we look at this example from class, Collins illustrates lack of empathy by highlighting how there are two very different sides to the Hunger Games to hint that we have little empathy to those worth out for us. We've got a great book world, illustrates lack of empathy with the two sides in the Hunger Games. That I can look at in the book. I can underline every time there's one of those different sides happening in the games. And I've got that connection to the real world. We have little empathy to those worth off than us. But I question that word illustrates. Does she seem just chill about it? Illustrates neutral. Given that some of the most beloved characters like Peeta and Rue are people with empathy, wouldn't you say she would feel badly when people don't have empathy? So I might revise to say that she's critiquing the lack of empathy in our society by highlighting those two very different sides in the Hunger Games. Because it seems like she's trying to push us to not be like that. I talked a little bit when we were going through the part on audience and purpose about I statements. One thing to think about with I statements is that, again, we are not just trying to provide an opinion or a review. We are trying to make, as I say down here, an argument about the author's argument. As such, you want to keep a distance from just your personal opinion or your personal feelings, and rather trying to turn things so that they are really stated as if they are an argument. You've got this different audience and purpose. So, if I look at this thesis statement, I believe that Collins' trilogy, The Hunger Games, creates a fictional government system to critique authoritarianism and totalitarianism. Certainly does connect the book world to the real world. Fictional government system, I can underline every time that somebody mentions the way the Capitol works, to critique more broadly these two big things that are unfortunately still very much part of our world, authoritarianism and totalitarianism. But I've got this I believe hanging out right there. It makes it say like I'm just giving my opinion, which is not the purpose. Is there a way that I could just turn that into a statement and then I'm going to use my sources, the book, to prove it? Simple fix. Collins is, note this right here, I know that that looks weird to many of you, but that's the correct way to do a singular possessive when it ends in S. Collins is The Hunger Games creates a fictional government system to critique authoritarianism and totalitarianism. Now, this is one place that I'm not going to read through the whole thing, every single sentence, but what I want you to take a focus on right here is how I move from a broad claim. I'm again going back to Effie Trinket. She creates the character of Effie Trinket to criticize the blindness of the upper classes to the sufferings of the poor. Now, on my topic sentences, I don't want to keep going back and saying over and over again, Effie Trinket is bad. Rather, what I want to do is to point to key places that shows this happening. If you look at the first topic sentence I have, one of the first places where Collins makes this argument, I'm using a pointing word to point back to this argument, critiquing the blindness, is when Effie first arrives in District 12, and her obsession with the spectacle of the games means she does not notice the intense pain this moment causes the residents. So I've picked one place. If we move on to the second topic sentence, I have picked another place. When Effie critiques previous tributes to Pete and Katniss, I've moved to a different spot in the book. Collins continues her criticism of how the wealthy ignore the true problems of the society. Each of these four topic sentences looks to a new moment that backs up what I say in the thesis. I'm not repeating the thesis. I'm not just giving a quote, nor am I giving a line about what happens next chronologically. I'm really thinking about building my argument by saying, okay, this is my main claim up here. How can I break that into various pieces? Let's take a look at an example from class. We've got this great thesis. Hansberry simply uses two main characters, Walter Younger and Mr. Carl Lindell, to represent how discrimination and difference of skin color can create such a disruption that affects human society and in people's everyday life. Works for me, but look at this first topic sentence. At the beginning, Act 2, Scene 3, where Hansberry frequently makes references to the phrase such as you people, often said from the character Mr. Linder. Okay, I'm just moving right there. All I'm doing is I'm like, okay, here's something that happens next in the play. But if I want to get to the fact that I want to talk about the scene because it's one example of this big issue I talked about above, maybe I could revise with something like this. You see how I'm using that pointing word again. One of the first places where Hansberry begins unveiling these problems of discrimination occurs at the beginning of Act 2, Scene 3. So it's a small change, but what I'm doing now is I'm linking this example that I'm going to use in the paragraph back to that thesis. So topic sentences remain a problem for many people, so I really encourage people to look at these, see how you can potentially use some of these moves to make your own topic sentences more cohesive. Chapter 8 of They Say, I Say, when it talks about the pointing words, is something you can go back to and look at different ways to do this. Finally, the idea of close reading. If anybody got the how and why do you know that, that's exactly what I'm talking about right there. I've provided you with some templates about how you break those down, that you think about connotation, denotation, and tone of the words going on in a passage. So here is a strong example from class. I want to just point to a few things that the reader's done. We've got Hansberry creates these characters of Benita and Mr. Linder to illustrate how difficult it was for underprivileged people to follow their passions and how easy it was for other people to manipulate and destroy dreams and hopes. Very clear thesis. We've got two specific characters, and we've got a claim that's related to the real world. So If we look at the topic sentence, that's good. A little later, Hansberry focused her critique of the society in general. And then we've got the quote. We've got Beneatha talking to Asagai. And that quote is, by writing Asagai while I was sleeping in that bed there, people went out into the future right out of my hands, and nobody asked me, nobody consulted me. They just went out and changed my life. Hansberry conveys her critique of society that does not care about the invisible. Now look at this choice. The words people went out into the future right out of my hands imply that some people have no influence or power over decisions that may affect their own lives. Furthermore, they feel that their opinion does not matter and they expose other people's decisions, be it to their advantage or disadvantage. Another really good thing to look at right here, the exclamation marks that Hansberry uses in this part. So that's a really important thing to say. What does an exclamation point mean? Let's see, why did Hansberry choose to do that? She could have used a period, a question mark. She could have done whatever she wanted. Our writer here says she uses them to help emphasize the importance of the situation to people who experience this kind of devastation. So, a couple more further resources for you. So again, I just want to show you guys where you'll be able to find all of this information on Blackboard. If you go into the assignments and you go to the Essay 2 folder, you will find all of this information right here in this revision work folder. And then of course, if we just click back to assignments, you will see that you also have the in-class writing. You've got all day to do this Monday, so you can really enjoy yourself with that. Oops, sorry, where's that right there? There it is, all day Monday to do that. There are 7 steps. Follow those 7 steps in order for 10 points of in-class writing. Make sure you're posting it to the correct place. It is on a discussion board forum. So I wish you guys all the best of luck. I'm so sorry that I'm not able to be there today. That's sometimes what happens when you work multiple jobs at the college. So of course, reach out if you have any questions.